A devastating fire is a horrifying thing to witness. But the crime behind it, arson, it's unique.
Oh, absolutely. There's a particular psychology to it.
Right. Most criminals, they want to get as far away from the scene as possible. But the arsonist, they often circle back. They're drawn to the chaos they've created.
They are. And in the case we're looking at today, that compulsion wasn't just a theory. It was documented by the criminal himself.
We're doing a deep dive into the story of John Orr, probably the most prolific serial arsonist in American history. And he actually detailed this exact behavior in his own unpublished novel, Point of Origin.
It's incredible. He wrote about an arsonist who returns to the scene, sometimes even, pretending to help put the fire out.
All while feeling this twisted sense of accomplishment, of pride.
And that's the core paradox of this whole story. John Leonard Orr was a celebrated, decorated fire officer, a captain. Yet for 30 years, he was setting thousands of fires.
Our mission today is to figure out how that combination of professional brilliance and just staggering ego ultimately became the blueprint for his own downfall.
And we've been looking at a lot of material for this, from investigative media to some really detailed excerpts from the Firebug podcast that lay out his dual life.
So to really get it, we have to go back to Los Angeles in the early 80s. The city was booming, changing.
But also becoming a bit more chaotic. And that chaos just exploded on October 10th, 1984 at a place called the Uli's Home Center in South Pasadena.
This wasn't just another fire. This one was fatal and really marked the beginning of the end for Orr.
It was a horrific tragedy. 4 people were killed instantly. Ada Deal, who was 50, her little 2-year-old grandson, Matthew Tredell.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And 2 young employees, Carolyn Krause, who was 26, and Jimmy Satina, just 17 years old. This was the moment he went from a serial arsonist to a mass murderer.
And what's so critical, so darkly ironic looking back, is that this tragedy immediately kicked off a huge institutional fight.
It did. The Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, the LAD, they came in and were just adamant. They insisted the cause was faulty electrical wiring. Case closed.
But the arson investigators on the scene?
Yeah.
They knew better.
They disagreed completely. They looked at the pattern, the sheer speed of the blaze, and they knew it had to be intentional. And one of the loudest voices arguing that it was arson,
Let me guess,
was Glendale Fire Captain John Orr himself. He was already investigating other nearby fires and was trying to convince the LAD that an arsonist was on the loose.
Wait. So the man who set the fire was also the one on the scene arguing with the police that it was arson?
Exactly.
Did nobody think that was a little weird? How insistent he was?
Not at first. And that's the genius of his disguise, you see. He was the expert. He was the go-to guy for arson investigation, so it just looked like professional dedication.
So the police just overruled the fire marshal?
They did. They treated the Uli's fire as an accidental death case. And in doing so, they basically took all the heat off the one person responsible and let him just walk away.
That decision must have given him so much confidence. I mean, he just killed 4 people. And the main police force was saying it wasn't even a crime.
Absolutely. The fatalities seemed to have emboldened him, not scared him off. And that led him to refine his modus operandi, his signature method.
We needed an ironclad alibi now, right?
Exactly. He perfected what's called a delayed incendiary device.
And we should be really clear about this device because it wasn't some complex bomb. Its simplicity is what made it so brilliant.
That's right. It was just 3 or 4 wooden matchsticks tied with a simple rubber band to the end of a lit cigarette.
And he just placed that little package inside something flammable.
Usually boxes of polyurethane foam or, other flammable merchandise. He'd place it, walk away, and the cigarette would slowly burn down.
In minutes, maybe even an hour later.
Boom. The match heads ignite, and a fire starts long after he's miles away from the scene.
The police were aware of this signature, which is why the arsonist got so many nicknames.
Yeah.
Right? And they really tell the story of his evolution.
They do. Initially, his targets were racks of potato chips in department stores.
Because of the high oil content.
Exactly. A quick, reliable burn. The police started calling him the Fredo Bandito.
Then he started physically changing the device itself.
Right. He attached a small coin to it for weight. That made it easier to toss from his car into, say, an open loading dock. That's when he became the coin tosser.
And finally, the pillow pyro.
When he started targeting the highly flammable material inside pillows, the nicknames show he was experimenting, refining his craft, and almost showing off his knowledge of fire science.
That element of showing off is so critical here, because these weren't just random acts. They became deeply provocative.
Oh, absolutely. He started setting many of his fires in or around the cities where the California Conference of Arson Investigators, the CCAI, was holding its annual events.
So he was literally lighting fires right under the noses of his own colleagues.
It was a direct challenge, a catch me if you can taunt. He wasn't just doing this for an emotional release. He wanted to prove he was smarter than all of them combined.
And that behavior is what put two investigators, Marvin Casey and Scott Baker, onto the right track.
It was the expertise, the timing, the sheer audacity of it all. It just screamed that the perpetrator was one of their own, an active or retired member of the firefighting community.
And Casey finally got his break in 1987.
Almost by pure chance, there was a failed arson attempt near the CCAI event in Fresno. The device, it didn't fully ignite.
And Casey found something.
He found a small piece of paper right next to the device, and on it were clear fingerprints.
That's the moment, the breakthrough. But it wasn't that simple, was it?
No. They ran the prints through the standard FBI criminal database, and nothing, no match.
Which only confirmed Casey's theory.
Right. The culprit was on the right side of the law. He had a clean record because he was a law enforcement professional.
So they had to start doing this massive, frustrating process of comparing the prints to everyone who attended those conferences.
Until the ATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, finally stepped in.
And they had a different database.
A national one that included the fingerprints of all commissioned law officers in the country. They ran the prints.
And they got a match.
A definitive match. Captain John Orr of the Glendale Fire Department.
Unbelievable. The man teaching others how to fight arson was the biggest arsonist the state had ever seen.
And if the fingerprint wasn't enough, well, this is where the story gets truly unbelievable.
The confession.
The arsonist wrote his own confession. While the ATF was building its case, quietly tailing him, Orr had just finished his thriller novel, Point of Origin.
And he just gave it to someone.
He gave a manuscript copy to his own boss, probably to, show off his writing talent. His boss skimmed it and immediately handed it straight to the ATF.
Because it wasn't just a story about a fictional arsonist.
No, it was a blueprint of his own crimes. The sources say the novel mirrored the real cases with, and I'm quoting here, exact precision.
It's just the level of detail was stunning.
It was. The book's hero, a firefighter arsonist named Aaron Stiles, surveys the scene of a fatal fire in a big store. The description of that fire, it perfectly matched the Uli's fire.
Down to the last moments of Ada Deal and her grandson.
It was a first-hand account. It proved he had been there watching everything unfold.
And he kept all the operational details in there too. He changed the names, of course.
Aaron Stiles was the arsonist. Phil Langley was the investigator chasing him. But the methods, using potato chips, the layout of the stores, the incendiary device, it was all there.
It's the ultimate psychological tell. He's writing in the third person, but he's basically justifying his own character's actions. He gets to be both the criminal and the detective.
It's the highest form of intellectual arrogance you can imagine.
Which brings us right to the motive. I mean, Orr still denies everything to this day, but his history is just filled with resentment.
We know he failed the psychological assessment for the LAPD. They flagged him as emotionally unstable. Then he failed the LA Fire Department. He had to settle for a lower-paying job in Glendale in '74.
And that string of rejections probably fueled this deep hatred for law enforcement, who he felt looked down on him.
He had to prove he was smarter than all of them, and his crimes were the way he did it. This even bled into his personal life.
Accounts from his ex-partner, Sharon Smith, are pretty damning.
They are. She showed a pattern where devastating fires would happen right after they had a major fight, or if she went on a date with someone else, he'd burn down that person's business.
It was about power and control, trying to be both the aggressor who causes the pain and the heroic firefighter who swoops in to save the day.
And this is where we have to make a really important distinction. The sources are clear. Orr was a true arsonist.
Meaning he had complete, calculated awareness and control. He wasn't a pyromaniac.
Exactly. Pyromania is an impulse control disorder, often followed by remorse. Orr meticulously planned his fires, refined his methods, and then wrote about them with a sense of mastery. There was zero remorse.
So he gets arrested in 1991. But the Uli's case, the murders, that doesn't go to trial until 1994.
Largely because of that initial faulty finding from the LAD, the prosecution's biggest hurdle was to prove it wasn't faulty wiring.
How did they do it?
It's a brilliant piece of legal work. They brought in the electrician who originally wired the Uli's home center.
Okay.
And he testified under oath that in the section of the store where the fire started, All the electrical wiring ran through the floor, not the ceiling.
So there were no wires in the ceiling to be faulty.
None at all. That testimony completely dismantled the LAD's theory and validated everything the fire marshals in Orr's novel had said.
And with that, the case was airtight.
He was found guilty of the 4 murders, 4 concurrent life terms without parole. His 30-year career as a double agent was finally over.
The ultimate takeaway here is just the sheer depth of the paradox. He was so good at his crime, setting over 2,000 fires, yet he ensured his own capture through pure hubris.
He didn't just leave a clue, he handed his boss a full literary confession.
It just shows you that when intelligence and ego get that big, the need for recognition can completely override the need for self-preservation. He needed the world to know how clever he was.
Even if it meant his freedom.
So what does this all mean for you? It means the most sophisticated criminals often leave the most intricate psychological trails. You just have to know where to look.
Even if that means looking inside the unpublished manuscript of a celebrated fire captain.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you to mull over.
Considering his deep-seated resentment and his obvious need to prove he was the smartest guy in the room, was that manuscript just a simple, careless act of boasting? Or was it a subconscious effort to make sure that someone, eventually, saw his genius for what it really was in a prison cell?